All right, so we're back at Gethsemane Garden Center looking for some bonsai material, and I want to get a white pine, but we're going to browse and see what they have here. This was very interesting. This was a dwarf fir tree, which is one of my favorite types of trees. Nice blue coloration, nice needle structure, but the only problem with this tree is that I couldn't really style anything out of it because the branches at the top are much thicker than the branches at the bottom, and the problem with a lot of these dwarf conifers is that the branches, they just kind of have these weird clusters and there's not really much you can style in terms of a bonsai tree, and they grow very slowly. So this one was just kind of a mess. I kind of really didn't see anything that I could turn this into, so I passed on it, but I have it in mind for maybe a future order. So here we have white pine. This is mainly what I came to check out, and the foliage is nice, but with this pine and with other pines, other white pines, you have this very smooth bark on the trunk, which isn't really too great. But the bigger problem I always see with white pine, even though this is, one of my favorite trees and I want to have some white pine in my collection, the problem is you get a lot of bar branches, which is, 2 or more branches growing at the same level on the tree. Of course, that isn't really too aesthetically good in terms of bonsai. And then on white pine, additionally, you get these very long internodes and generally kind of thin branches. So it's kind of difficult for me to find good white pine for bonsai. Here we have a American Ginkgo cultivar, and it's the same one I bought earlier. I bought a smaller variety, but it's nice to see that you can actually gain a pretty decent size on that Ginkgo while retaining a lot of branches towards the bottom of the tree. So hopefully mine will turn into something like that. I got to get mine planted in the ground. And here we have one of those thinner leaf Ginkgo varieties, and I've been kind of wanting to maybe get one ever since I saw it at the Foxwillow Pines place, but I don't know, I just haven't really, decided and pulled the trigger on buying one of those ginkgos. So here we have, what I call a blue pine because it has kind of a bluish coloration to the needles. I forgot exactly what that tag said. Of course, you can pause the video and see what that tag is, but kind of same problem as the white pine. Long internodes, very thin branches. All the branches are coming off at the same point in the tree, and I've seen this over and over again with white pines and kind of pines that are similar to white pine. It's very difficult to find something that's acceptable material, and it seems like a lot of these branches would be good in terms of foliage pads. They have a nice kind of back budding there. The only problem is the branches are thin. They're all growing out at the same point in the tree, so really is hard to find good white pine. Then here we have something that looked a lot like a pine. I thought it was some kind of maybe cultivar of mugo pine, but this is a spruce, and you can see you kind of have a reversion at one of the back branches here. This, of course, is a cultivar. It's usually what's known as a witch's broom, which is kind of like a genetic mutation that gets propagated through cuttings and grafting, but sometimes it can revert. Usually you cut that off and it's fine. But more importantly, I wanted to look inside this tree at the branch structure. And like I said, with a lot of these dwarf varieties that are naturally dwarf, you get kind of very bad growth. This one seemed to have longer branches, but again, you go inside here and just kind of these weird clusters of thin branches leads to some weird reverse taper situations and just kind of a mess of, jumbled branches inside the middle of the tree. So even though the overall shape might be nice, the foliage shape might be nice, a lot of these dwarf conifers, the branch structure is just kind of really bad and kind of really something tough to work with in terms of styling a nice first branch, second branch, back branch into a decent bonsai tree. And so here we have Catherine Elizabeth white pine. It's something I've been wanting. And the Hidden Gardens has some of this material, and it's a little bit better than this one. This is the only Catherine Elizabeth white pine they had here today. So I really like the foliage, but again, branch structure just was kind of garbage, so I just couldn't buy something where I don't see a potential future in terms of styling. Here we have a Goldilocks pine, and this is a white pine, I think. really nice foliage. You could see some nice foliage pads forming potentially in the future, but same problem, long internode, all the branches circling around one area, blah, blah, blah. I've said this throughout this video. That's just kind of the problem with trying to find a good white pine. The branching structure on a lot of them is just kind of really garbage, kind of really difficult to work with. So I started moving back to the maple section, and I really wanted to get a conifer because I love conifers, but I thought, you know what, maybe if there's a good maple here, I can check out the fall coloration. First up is this coral bark maple, and I thought, you know what, this is actually pretty good. I've heard of these before, and now that I see the fall coloration, this is kind of really interesting. You can see it's kind of getting a kind of pinkish blush with the green bark at the bottom, and these really, really intensely kind of red colored twigs around the outside, and apparently this gets even more intense as the winter goes on, so it's kind of interesting to have a tree that has color changing bark throughout the season. So I looked for a good one, I looked through all those, and then I came across this one, and I felt like, you know what, that one has a good first branch, has a pretty decent second branch there, and some nice branches all around the bottom of this tree. We can probably chop back the apex, and we already have a nice tree forming there. So the kind of decision I have is, do I want to put it in the ground, thicken it up a little bit more, and is that going to affect the color of that bark? So we'll have to think about that. And then for the rest of this video, I have what I call marijuana maples, and I thought that might be funny. Maybe somebody would be interested in getting something like this. I don't know if it's the best stock in terms of branch structure, but, I don't know. Maybe somebody wants something like this. It doesn't really interest me too much. I'm not a big fan, and I'm not going to get into that because, some of the culture around weed, it just gets kind of annoying. So I'm not going to go into it, but I'll just say I'm not really a huge fan. Doesn't really do anything for me, but it's kind of funny to see something like that. I thought about getting something like that. I just don't have the room to grow something that's like a novelty in my yard, taking up space just so I can point at it once in a while and say, oh, what does that remind you of? But hey, maybe somebody is interested in something like that. So we have like even a red one, and the foliage looks kind of similar to something that would be like, what's the thinner one? A sativa. Then coming up here, we have kind of a rounder one that's almost like an indica, and it's more green. So that's going to be this one. Even has that nice shape to it, another like teardrop shape if somebody pruned it correctly. So that's kind of a funny variety, but like I said, nothing that interested me too much. Just thought I would include it in the video just because it might be kind of funny and interesting for an episode. Then moving right along, we have a lot of dwarf Alberta spruce here, and there was even some twin trunk dwarf Alberta spruce like this one. So if anybody is in the area and they like that concept of the twin trunk dwarf Alberta spruce that I just made, here's a great place to find some of them. And then we also have bird's nest spruce. It looks like they got a shipment of kind of more typical average conifers instead of the spectacular stuff they usually have in the spring and summer here. But I mean, hey, maybe somebody wants one of those bird's nest dwarf spruce, or maybe one of these dwarf mugo pine would be interesting as kind of a very, very small sized bonsai tree. So they have that there. I almost thought about getting one of these, but I already have 2 mugo pines, so I probably shouldn't, so I didn't. So here, this next clip is just going to be the maple sitting in my yard. Like I said, very nice red coloration, and apparently this isn't even the peak season for this tree yet, so maybe I'll come back in a few weeks and kind of show the peak season red coloration on the branches. We might have to wait until winter time until it's very, very bright red. But yeah, I'm looking forward to styling this tree in the future. Looks like it has some really nice potential to it once we chop back that apex. So I'm just going to make some decisions on styling and get styling very soon.